Picture this, April 28, 1945. Adolf Hitler's most fanatical bodyguards, the very men who swore a blood oath to protect him with their lives, are stripping off their SS uniforms, burning their identification papers, and fleeing Berlin like rats from a sinking ship. These weren't ordinary soldiers. These were the elite Leibstandarte SS, Hitler's personal guard unit, abandoning their Führer as Soviet artillery pounds the bunker above his head. In just 48 hours, the man they called their supreme leader would put a bullet through his skull, utterly alone, betrayed by the very forces he created to ensure his immortality. What you're about to witness isn't just another World War II story. It's the ultimate betrayal that history tried to bury. Because when the men who tattooed their blood type under their arms as a mark of racial superiority suddenly tried to scrape those same tattoos off with broken glass and kitchen knives, you know something extraordinary happened in those final days. Before you hear what made Heinrich Himmler himself, the architect of the Holocaust, attempt to negotiate his own separate peace deal behind Hitler's back, do me a favor. If this grips you the way it gripped me when I discovered these declassified documents, hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who thinks they know how the Third Reich ended, because I promise you, they don't know this part. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days in Berlin. Wilhelm Mohnke, commanding officer of the Führer bunker's defense, stood in Hitler's Situation Room on April 20th, 1945, the Führer's 56th birthday. The man before him was no longer the charismatic leader who had mesmerized millions. Hitler's left hand trembled uncontrollably from Parkinson's disease. His eyes were bloodshot, and his uniform hung loose on his shrinking frame. Yet Mohnke was supposed to tell his men outside that victory was still possible. Mein Führer, Mohnke began carefully, watching Hitler's good hand grip the edge of the map table. The Soviets have broken through the Silo Heights. Marshal Zhukov's forces are less than 60 kilometers away. Hitler's response was to launch into a fantasy about Wehrmacht divisions that existed only on paper, about miracle weapons that would never come, about Frederick the Great's last-minute salvation of Prussia. But Mohnke wasn't listening anymore. He was thinking about the conversation he'd had that morning with SS Brigadeführer Krukenberg. They both knew what the Soviets did to captured SS officers. The stories from the Eastern Front were nightmarish. SS men found with their unit tattoos carved out, their eyes gouged, their bodies mutilated beyond recognition. That same day, Hermann Fegelein, Heinrich Himmler's liaison to Hitler and Eva Braun's brother-in-law, was packing a suitcase in his apartment on Bleibtreustrasse. He'd already removed 100,000 Reichsmarks from the SS treasury, along with gold watches and jewelry confiscated from concentration camp victims. His pregnant mistress waited in Bavaria. Like many SS officers, Fegelein had been living a double life, preaching total war and racial purity by day, planning his escape by night. But it was Otto Günsche, Hitler's personal adjutant and SS Sturmbannführer, who witnessed the true beginning of the end. On April 22nd, Hitler suffered what Günsche later described as a complete nervous breakdown during the Daily Situation Conference. When told that SS Obergruppenführer Felix Steiner's counterattack hadn't materialized because Steiner's army was a handful of exhausted battalions, Hitler exploded into a rage that lasted 3 hours. Der Krieg ist verloren, Hitler screamed. The war is lost. For the first time, he admitted defeat. Then came the words that changed everything. I will stay in Berlin and shoot myself when the time comes. The room fell silent. Günsche watched as Wilhelm Burgdorf, Hans Krebs, and Alfred Jodl, all senior officers, exchanged glances. These weren't looks of devotion or determination to die with their leader. They were calculating their own survival. Within hours, Günsche noticed SS guards disappearing from their posts. Not deserting en masse, that would be too obvious, but one by one, claiming illness, requesting transfers, simply vanishing into the chaos of burning Berlin. Heinrich Müller, head of the Gestapo, was among the first senior SS leaders to betray Hitler's trust. While maintaining his facade of loyalty, Müller had been in contact with Soviet intelligence since 1944. Documents discovered after the war revealed he'd been preparing his defection for months, gathering intelligence files to trade for his safety. On April 23rd, he told his secretary, Barbara Helmuth, "One should never have illusions. This bunker will be our grave, or our starting point for a new life under new masters." The real shock came from the Waffen-SS divisions Hitler counted as his most loyal. The 11th SS Volunteer Panzer Grenadier Division Nordland, composed of foreign volunteers who joined specifically to fight Bolshevism, began fragmenting. Danish volunteers were removing their SS runes, claiming they were Wehrmacht. Norwegian SS men were burning their soldbooks, their military identification books. Even the French SS volunteers of the Charlemagne Division, who'd arrived in Berlin on April 24th to defend the capital, were privately discussing surrender terms. But perhaps the most telling sign of the collapse was found in the bunker's radio room. SS Untersturmführer Rochus Misch, the bunker's chief radio operator, later testified that by April 23rd, he was receiving a stream of encrypted messages from SS units requesting permission to withdraw, to surrender, to negotiate local ceasefires. These weren't cowards. These were hardened veterans of the Eastern Front who'd committed unspeakable atrocities in the name of Nazi ideology. Now they were desperate to distance themselves from those very crimes. The transformation was swift and brutal. SS Standartenführer Walter Schellenberg, Himmler's intelligence chief, had already begun negotiating with the Swedish Count Folke Bernadotte for a separate peace. He later wrote in his memoirs, "We all knew the game was over. The only question was whether we'd hang as war criminals or reinvent ourselves as anti-communist allies of the West." This calculated betrayal extended to the most elite unit of all, the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler. These were the men who'd been with Hitler since the beginning, his original bodyguard regiment that had grown into a full division. On April 23rd, their commander, SS Brigadeführer Gustav Krukenberg, received orders to hold the government quarter at all costs. Instead, he began ordering his men to cache civilian clothes in strategic locations. He told his adjutant, "Dead heroes are useless to their families. Live cowards can at least rebuild." As word spread through the SS ranks that Himmler himself was negotiating with the Allies, the facade of loyalty crumbled entirely. Officers who'd executed deserters just weeks earlier were now planning their own escapes. The same men who'd machine gunned surrendering prisoners were practicing their English phrases. "I am not SS. I am Wehrmacht. I know nothing of camps." The morning of April 25th brought a revelation that would shatter Hitler's last illusions about loyalty. Luftwaffe ace and Hitler youth leader Artur Axmann burst into the bunker with news that sent Hitler into his final, most violent rage. Reuters had released a report. Heinrich Himmler, Reichsführer SS, the man Hitler called Der Treue Heinrich, Loyal Heinrich, had been negotiating Germany's surrender through Swedish intermediaries. Hitler's scream could be heard 3 rooms away. Günsche later described Hitler's face turning purple, foam appearing at the corners of his mouth. "This is the worst treachery I have ever known," Hitler roared. The man who controlled 4 million SS members, who'd built the concentration camps, who'd orchestrated the final solution, had betrayed him. But Himmler's betrayal was just the tip of the iceberg. What Hitler didn't know was that at that very moment, SS Obergruppenführer Gottlob Berger was meeting with Swiss Red Cross representatives to arrange the release of Jewish prisoners from concentration camps, not out of humanity, but to create alibis for war crimes trials. SS guards at Dachau, Bergen-Belsen, and Buchenwald were destroying evidence, burning documents, and dynamiting gas chambers, while telling prisoners they'd always tried to be fair. Meanwhile, Hermann Fegelein's absence had been noticed. Eva Braun's brother-in-law hadn't been seen for 2 days. When SS Standartenführer Johann Rattenhuber finally tracked him down to his apartment, they found Fegelein drunk, in civilian clothes, with a suitcase full of foreign currency and his mistress's jewelry. Even more damning, they found a foreign passport in a false name. Hitler ordered Fegelein brought back to the bunker immediately. During his interrogation, conducted by Rattenhuber and Müller, Fegelein broke down. He admitted that at least 30 high-ranking SS officers had already fled Berlin with false papers. He named names. SS Gruppenführer Leonardo Conti had escaped to Switzerland. SS Oberführer Oswald Pohl had liquidated concentration camp assets and disappeared. Even SS doctors from the euthanasia program had shed their uniforms and melted into the refugee columns. The interrogation revealed an even darker truth. The SS had been preparing for defeat since the Battle of Stalingrad in 1943. Secret funds had been established in Swiss banks. Escape routes called rat lines had been organized through Catholic monasteries in Austria and Italy. False identities had been prepared for hundreds of war criminals. The organization Hitler had built as his Praetorial Guard had become an elaborate escape network. SS Obersturmbannführer Adolf Eichmann, architect of the Holocaust's logistics, had already fled to Austria with papers identifying him as Otto Eckmann, a Luftwaffe corporal. Joseph Mengele, the angel of death from Auschwitz, was hiding in a farmhouse near Rosenheim, with documents claiming he was a farmhand named Fritz Hollmann. These weren't spontaneous escapes, they were carefully orchestrated operations that had been months in planning. In the bunker's map room, General Helmuth Weidling, Berlin's last defense commander, was having his own crisis. The SS units he was counting on were evaporating. The 11th SS Nordland Division reported heavy casualties that didn't match any known engagements. The 33rd Waffen Grenadier Division of the SS Charlemagne claimed to be redeploying when they were actually surrendering to Americans racing toward Berlin from the west. Even more shocking were the reports from SS field commanders. SS Oberführer Oskar Dirlewanger, whose brigade had committed such horrific atrocities that even other SS units avoided them, had deserted his men and fled toward Switzerland. His subordinates found his uniform burning in a barrel behind his headquarters, along with photographs of mass executions he'd overseen. The Waffen-SS Foreign Legions were disintegrating fastest. Belgian SS volunteers were claiming they'd been forced to join at gunpoint. Dutch SS men were insisting they'd only fought against communism, not for Nazism. The Muslim SS divisions from Bosnia were dissolving into the countryside, their members vanishing into refugee camps where they claimed to be Yugoslav civilians fleeing Soviet revenge. But it was in the concentration camps where the SS betrayal was most grotesque. Guards who'd spent years brutalizing prisoners were suddenly trying to befriend them. At Mauthausen, SS Hauptsturmführer Georg Bachmeier shot himself rather than face his victims. At Dachau, guards were offering inmates extra food and medical care, hoping for testimonials of good treatment. Some were even helping prisoners escape, calculating that saved lives might save their own necks. By April 26th, the situation had become surreal. SS officers were approaching American and British lines under white flags, not to negotiate Germany's surrender, but their own personal surrenders. They came bearing gifts, intelligence about Soviet positions, locations of hidden art treasures, names of communist agents, anything to avoid being handed over to the Soviets. April 27, 1945. The Soviet noose around Berlin had tightened to just 10 square kilometers. In the Führer bunker, Martin Bormann, Hitler's private secretary and the man who controlled access to the Führer, was secretly burning documents that would have exposed his own Swiss bank accounts containing millions in stolen Nazi gold. While maintaining his facade as Hitler's most devoted follower, Bormann had already sent his wife and children to safety in the Austrian Alps, with enough looted art and currency to live comfortably for generations. Think about this for a moment. If you were in that bunker, knowing the Soviets' reputation for revenge, knowing what you'd done in the regime's name, what would you do? Would you stay loyal to a madman, or would you try to save yourself? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'm genuinely curious how you think you'd react in such an impossible situation. The bunker had become a stage for elaborate performances of loyalty, while everyone plotted their escapes. Joseph Goebbels, the only senior Nazi who would actually die with Hitler, watched in disgust as SS officers invented excuses to leave. "They scatter like roaches when the light comes on," he wrote in his final diary entry. Even Goebbels' own bodyguard, SS Hauptsturmführer Günther Schwegermann, was secretly planning his escape route through the U-Bahn tunnels. Above ground, the battle for Berlin had taken a surreal turn. SS Brigadeführer Joachim Ziegler, commanding the 11th SS Nordland Division's remnants, received a direct order from Hitler to hold the Reichstag at all costs. Instead, Ziegler ordered his men to change into civilian clothes, hidden in nearby buildings. When questioned by Krukenberg, Ziegler responded, "I won't sacrifice my men for a building that hasn't functioned since 1933. The foreign SS volunteers were in open revolt. Henri-Joseph Finet, commanding the French SS volunteers, discovered his men were surrendering to the Soviets while claiming to be forced laborers from France. When he tried to stop them, his own sergeant, Unterscharführer Eugene Volot, pointed out the obvious. "We came to fight Bolshevism, not to die for Hitler's delusions." Meanwhile, the most elite SS unit in Berlin, the Führer Begleit Brigade, was falling apart. Their commander, SS Oberführer Theodor Wisch, had already sent his family west with looted paintings from the Reich Chancellery. On April 27th, he gathered his officers and told them bluntly, "Gentlemen, the Führer has released us from our oath." This was a lie. Hitler had done no such thing, but it gave his men the excuse they needed to abandon their posts. The SS medical staff in the bunker were preparing for their own escapes. Dr. Ernst Günther Schenk, an SS doctor who'd experimented on prisoners at Mauthausen, was destroying his research files while publicly declaring his intention to stay and tend the wounded. In reality, he was memorizing Soviet medical phrases and had already removed his SS insignia. Even Hitler's personal bodyguard was wavering. SS Hauptsturmführer Peter Hogel, chief of the Reich Sicherheitsdienst unit protecting Hitler, confided to his deputy that he was considering shooting Hitler himself if it meant the guards could surrender peacefully. "One bullet could save hundreds of lives," he whispered, though he never found the courage to act. The betrayal reached its peak with the discovery of Operation Seraglio, Himmler's secret plan to evacuate top SS leaders to an Alpine fortress where they could hold out indefinitely or negotiate better terms. The plan included detailed lists of which SS officers were essential for the future Fourth Reich Himmler imagined he would lead. Hitler's name was notably absent from these lists. By evening, the bunker received its most devastating blow. General Wilhelm Keitel called from the OKW headquarters to inform Hitler that no relief forces were coming. The armies Hitler had been moving on his maps existed only in his imagination. SS Obergruppenführer Felix Steiner, who was supposed to launch a counterattack, admitted he had no forces left. His men had deserted or surrendered. The reaction in the bunker was immediate. SS officers, who'd been loudly proclaiming their loyalty that morning, were now approaching Rattenhuber for exit permits. They claimed urgent missions, to check on defensive positions, to gather supplies, to coordinate with non-existent units. Rattenhuber, who knew they were deserting, approved them anyway. He later admitted, "What was the point? We were all dead men walking." April 28th arrived with Soviet shells falling directly on the Reich Chancellery garden above the bunker. The end was perhaps 48 hours away, and everyone knew it. That morning brought the final, most personal betrayal Hitler would experience. Eva Braun came to him in tears. She'd learned that Hermann Fegelein, her own brother-in-law, had been trying to escape with another woman. Hitler's rage was apocalyptic. He ordered Fegelein court-martialed immediately. The trial, if it could be called that, lasted 10 minutes. SS Gruppenführer Johann Rattenhuber pronounced the sentence, death. But even this execution was tainted by self-interest. The SS officers conducting it knew that killing Eva Braun's brother-in-law might curry favor with the Allies, proof they hadn't been completely loyal to Hitler's inner circle. As Fegelein was led to the Chancellery garden to be shot, he screamed, "You're all hypocrites. Every one of you has an escape plan. I just had the courage to use mine." The accusation hung in the air as the bullets ended his life. The SS execution squad, normally precise and ceremonial, was sloppy. It took 3 volleys to kill him. Even in carrying out Hitler's final orders, the SS was falling apart. That afternoon, Walter Wagner, a minor city official and Nazi Party member, was brought to the bunker to perform Hitler's marriage to Eva Braun. The ceremony was witnessed by Goebbels and Bormann, but notably absent were any SS officers. They were too busy with their own preparations. SS Brigadeführer Wilhelm Mohnke was distributing civilian clothes to his staff. SS Standartenführer Franz Schädle was burning records of SS atrocities in Poland. The marriage certificate itself became a symbol of the surreal denialism gripping the bunker. Hitler signed it Adolf Hitler, then had to cross it out and sign again with his full name, as legally required. Even in marrying Eva, he couldn't fully commit to reality. Meanwhile, 3 rooms away, SS communications officers were encoding messages to units that no longer existed, maintaining the pretense of a functioning command structure. Outside the bunker, the SS betrayal had become a stampede. The legendary 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandart SS Adolf Hitler, Hitler's namesake unit, was fragmenting. Individual soldiers were approaching Soviet lines with white flags, claiming to be conscripts. Officers were shooting themselves rather than risk capture. Others were trading their weapons for civilian clothes from dead Berliners. SS Hauptsturmführer Georg Betz, a decorated tank commander, later described the scene. "We'd fought from France to Russia and back. We'd committed terrible acts in Hitler's name. And now, in the final hour, we were throwing away our death's head insignia like they were poisoned. The oath we'd sworn meant nothing when faced with Soviet revenge." The concentration camp guards fleeing westward were perhaps the most pathetic. These men who'd wielded absolute power over helpless prisoners were now themselves helpless refugees. At improvised Allied checkpoints, they were easy to spot, well-fed among the starving, with suspicious gaps in their military records. With blood group tattoos they tried to explain away as medical precautions. Some attempts at disguise were almost comical in their desperation. SS Oberscharführer Joseph Blosche, known as Frankenstein for his role in crushing the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, was caught wearing a dress and claiming to be a Polish refugee. SS Unterscharführer Oskar Groening, the bookkeeper of Auschwitz, was found working as a farmhand, insisting he'd never heard of the SS. Back in the bunker, Hitler was dictating his political testament. In it, he expelled Hermann Göring and Heinrich Himmler from the Nazi Party for their betrayals. He appointed Grand Admiral Karl Donitz as his successor, not an SS man, but a naval officer. The message was clear. Hitler no longer trusted the organization he'd built as his personal army. But even as Hitler wrote, his new appointments were already planning for a post-Hitler world. Donitz was in Plön, far from Berlin, secretly opening communications with the Western Allies. Field Marshal Ferdinand Schörner, whom Hitler named as new army commander, was preparing his own escape to American lines. Even Goebbels, appointed as new chancellor in Hitler's testament, knew he would never serve. He'd already decided to kill himself and his children rather than live in a world without National Socialism. April 29, 1945, Hitler's penultimate day. At 2 a.m., General Weidling reported that Soviet forces were just 500 meters from the bunker. The SS units defending the government quarter had ceased to exist as coherent formations. Individual SS men were fighting, fleeing, or surrendering based entirely on personal calculation. The oath they'd sworn, "Meine Ehe heißt Treue," "My honor is loyalty," had become a bitter joke. Hitler's new brother-in-law, Hermann Fegelein, had been dead for barely 24 hours, but his execution had sent shockwaves through the remaining SS officers. If Hitler would kill Eva Braun's brother-in-law, no one was safe. SS Sturmbannführer Günsche began making his own preparations, secretly packing a small bag with civilian clothes and American cigarettes, currency for bribing his way through Soviet lines. That morning brought news that perfectly encapsulated the SS collapse. The Guard battalion at Hitler's Berghof retreat in Bavaria, his beloved mountain sanctuary, had looted the residence and fled. These weren't Soviet soldiers or American troops. These were SS men who'd been entrusted with protecting Hitler's most private refuge. They'd stolen paintings, silverware, even Hitler's personal photograph albums, before disappearing into the chaos of collapsing Germany. In the bunker's communications room, Rochus Misch was receiving increasingly desperate messages from SS units across the shrinking Reich. But instead of battle reports or requests for orders, they were asking for authorization to surrender, to negotiate, to withdraw for regrouping. One message from SS Oberführer Siegfried Taubert was particularly telling. Request permission to preserve forces for future operations against Bolshevism under new leadership. Even while asking to surrender, the SS was already trying to rebrand itself as anti-communist rather than Nazi. The marriage of convenience between the SS and Wehrmacht was also disintegrating. General Weidling reported that SS units were refusing Wehrmacht commands, while Wehrmacht units were refusing to follow SS officers. In one section of Berlin's defense, an argument between an SS colonel and a Wehrmacht major had erupted into a shootout, with Germans killing Germans while Soviet forces watched in amazement. At 3 p.m., Hitler received what Günsche later called the death blow to his faith in the SS. A message arrived revealing that SS Obergruppenführer Leonardo Conti, the Reich health leader who'd overseen the euthanasia program, had not only fled to Switzerland, but had taken with him detailed records of every SS officer involved in medical experiments and mass killings. Insurance for his own survival that would doom his former comrades. The bunker itself was becoming a madhouse of paranoia and preparation. SS officers were approaching Soviet prisoners held in the chancellery basement, trying to learn Russian phrases. Ja ne SS, ja Wehrmacht. I am not SS, I am Wehrmacht, became the most practiced sentence. Some were even more creative. SS Hauptsturmführer Erich Kempka, Hitler's chauffeur, was telling anyone who'd listen that he was just a driver, never involved in politics. Meanwhile, the foreign SS legions were in complete dissolution. The Spanish volunteers of the Blue Division had vanished overnight. The Indian Legion, composed of former British Indian Army prisoners, had split into factions, some trying to reach American lines, others hoping to blend into the massive refugee columns fleeing westward. Their commander, SS Oberfuhrer Heinz Bertling, had shot himself rather than explain to Hitler where his men had gone. By evening, even the bunker's basic security was compromised. SS guards were abandoning their posts without relief, simply walking away into the burning city. When Rattenhuber tried to stop one young SS Rottenführer from leaving, the soldier laughed. "What will you do, Herr Standartenführer? Shoot me? The Soviets will do that tomorrow anyway." Hitler spent his last full day oscillating between delusion and clarity. In one moment, he was still moving non-existent armies on his map. In the next, he was telling his secretary, Traudl Junge, "I should have liquidated all the high officers like Stalin did." The man who'd built the SS as his instrument of terror now recognized it had become a network of self-interested opportunists. That night, Hitler performed his last official act related to the SS. He stripped Himmler of all ranks and positions, declaring him a traitor to the Reich, but the proclamation was meaningless. Himmler was already in Lübeck, negotiating with Count Bernadotte, still delusionally believing he could become Germany's new leader under Allied occupation. He'd even prepared a new government list, appointing various SS officers to ministerial positions in his imaginary post-war administration. As April 29th became April 30th, the bunker's ventilation system began drawing in smoke from the burning city above. The air itself tasted of defeat. SS Untersturmführer Heinz Linge, Hitler's valet, later recalled the Führer's final words about the SS. "Even Himmler has betrayed me. There is no honor left in Germany." April 30th, 1945, 3:30 p.m. The gunshot that ended Adolf Hitler's life echoed through the bunker's narrow corridors. But for the SS men still present, it wasn't a moment of tragic loyalty. It was the firing of a starting pistol for their own escapes. Within seconds of confirming Hitler's death, SS Sturmbannführer Günsche was on the radio, not announcing the Führer's death to the nation, but trying to arrange safe passage for himself through Soviet lines. The burning of Hitler's body in the Chancellery Garden was performed by the remaining SS guards, but even this final act of supposed devotion was tainted. Erich Kempka, who poured gasoline on the bodies, later admitted he was already wearing civilian clothes under his SS uniform. As the flames consumed Hitler and Eva's corpses, Kempka was calculating how many hours he had before Soviet forces overran the position. Within an hour of Hitler's death, Martin Bormann convened what he called a situation conference, but was actually an escape planning session. The topic wasn't continuing the fight or dying heroically. It was how to break out of Berlin in small groups. The SS officers present each had different plans. Mohnke would lead a breakout through the subway tunnels. Rattenhuber would try to reach German lines to the west. Even Goebbels' adjutant, Günther Schwegermann, was included in escape plans despite his master's decision to die. The news of Hitler's death spread through the remaining SS units like wildfire, and the reaction was immediate: mass desertion. The Frenchman of the SS Charlemagne, who'd been fighting fanatically just hours before, simply stopped shooting. When their commander, Henry Finet, asked why, a young Unterscharführer replied, "We swore an oath to Hitler, not to a dead man." At the Anhalter Bahnhof, where SS units were supposedly holding a defensive line, soldiers were stripping off their uniforms and changing into civilian clothes taken from corpses. The transformation was grotesque. Men who'd worn the death's head insignia with pride were now dressed as grocers, postal workers, anything but what they were. Some were so desperate to remove their blood group tattoos that they were cutting them out with bayonets, leaving bloody wounds that would ironically make them easier to identify. By 6 p.m., Goebbels and his wife Magda had poisoned their 6 children and committed suicide, the only senior Nazis to follow Hitler in death. But even Goebbels' SS bodyguards didn't pause to mourn. Schwegermann, who shot Goebbels' body to ensure he was dead, immediately joined the escape groups forming in the bunker. Loyalty, it seemed, didn't extend beyond the last breath of their leaders. The breakout attempts that night revealed the complete disintegration of SS discipline. Groups that started together split apart at the first sign of danger. Officers abandoned their men. Men shot their officers to take their better equipment. SS Hauptsturmführer Gerhard Bolt witnessed an SS colonel shoot 2 of his own men who tried to surrender to Soviets, only to be shot himself by a third, who then promptly surrendered with the colonel's white handkerchief. Wilhelm Mohnke led one of the larger breakout groups through the U-Bahn tunnels, but even this organized escape fell apart. When they reached the Friedrichstrasse station and found it occupied by Soviets, panic ensued. SS men trampled each other trying to flee. Some surrendered immediately, others turned their weapons on their comrades to clear a path. The elite guard that had once marched in perfect formation through Nuremberg now scattered like frightened animals. The foreign SS volunteers met particularly ironic fates. Many who joined to fight communism now tried to defect to the Soviets, claiming they'd been forced to serve. The Soviets, unimpressed, shot most of them on sight. Others tried to blend in with Wehrmacht prisoners, but were betrayed by their accents or their superior physical condition. Concentration camp rations had kept regular army soldiers thin, while SS units had remained well-fed until the very end. Among the most pathetic scenes was the fate of the SS field police, the Feldgendarmerie, who'd spent the war hanging deserters from lampposts with signs reading, "I was a coward." Now they themselves were deserting, some still wearing the gorgets that identified them as military police. One was caught by Soviet troops and forced to wear his own coward sign before being shot. A dark, poetic justice that even Soviet officers found grimly appropriate. As May 1st dawned, the remnants of Hitler's SS were scattered across Berlin and beyond. Some, like Günsche and Kempka, would spend years in Soviet captivity. Others, like Bormann, would die in the escape attempt. His body wouldn't be found for decades. But many succeeded in their transformation from SS killers to innocent civilians. The speed of this transformation was breathtaking. Within 72 hours of Hitler's death, former SS officers were working as translators for the Allies, offering their services against the Soviets. Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon, was already in contact with American intelligence. Otto Günsche, Hitler's commando leader, was planning his future as an anti-communist mercenary. Hundreds of concentration camp guards had melted into the refugee population, their crimes hidden among the general catastrophe of Germany's collapse. The Vatican rat lines were activated, shepherding war criminals to South America. Odessa, the mysterious SS escape network, began operating, though its full extent remains debated by historians. What's certain is that thousands of SS men successfully escaped justice. Adolf Eichmann would live freely in Argentina for 15 years. Joseph Mengele would die a free man in Brazil in 1979. Countless others would live out their lives under false names, their neighbors never knowing they'd once worn the death's head insignia. The 1,000-year Reich had lasted just 12 years. The SS, which Himmler had envisioned as an eternal order of racial warriors, had disintegrated in a matter of days once their leader was gone. The same men who'd sworn blood oaths, who'd participated in genocide, who'd proclaimed their loyalty unto death, had revealed themselves as opportunists and cowards when the final test came. Standing in the ruins of Berlin on May 2, 1945, Soviet Marshal Georgy Zhukov surveyed the abandoned SS positions. Uniforms lay scattered in the streets like shed snakeskins. The defenders of the master race had fled, leaving only these black rags behind. They were tigers when they had power, Zhukov told his aide, but rats when faced with justice. The story of the SS's betrayal of Hitler in his final days isn't just a historical footnote. It's a profound lesson about the nature of extremist loyalty. These men, who committed history's worst atrocities in the name of absolute devotion, proved that their ideology was hollow, their oaths meaningless, their loyalty nothing more than self-interest disguised as fanaticism. Perhaps that's the most important lesson from those April days in 1945. Evil regimes don't just collapse from external pressure, they rot from within, abandoned by the very forces created to preserve them. When the end came for Hitler, he learned what every tyrant eventually discovers. Those who swear the loudest loyalty are often the first to flee when the bill comes due. The ghosts of the SS still haunt us today, not in the supernatural sense, but in the reminder they provide. They remind us that ordinary men can become monsters, that monsters can become cowards, and that cowards will always try to become ordinary men again when their crimes catch up with them. They failed, ultimately, because history doesn't forget, even when the perpetrators desperately try to. As you leave this story, remember this. The SS's betrayal of Hitler wasn't noble or redemptive. It was the final act of a criminal organization trying to escape the consequences of its crimes. They betrayed Hitler not out of principle, but out of the same self-serving cowardice that had led them to join him in the first place. The real heroes of April 1945 weren't the SS men who fled. They were the survivors who emerged from concentration camps, the resistance fighters who'd fought in shadows, the ordinary Germans who'd quietly resisted. They were the ones who maintained their humanity when surrounded by inhumanity. History judges harshly those who claim they were just following orders, only to abandon those orders the moment they become inconvenient. The SS learned this lesson too late. Their black uniforms, once symbols of terror across Europe, became death sentences they desperately tried to shed. But history remembers. It always remembers.